Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on an introduction to case lines. My name is Betty Montoni, and I'm an e-discovery and case lines specialist with Thomson Reuters here in Toronto. The purpose of our call today, of course, is to give you an overview of case lines with respect to your experience when you're invited into the Ontario Courts version of case lines, and as well to give you a little bit of a preview as to what case lines can actually do functionally within the scope of a law firm or within the scope of your workflow. Joining me on my call, of course, are my producers, Joanne Gordon and Mike Harrison. They will be monitoring the chat line, the chat box rather, in terms of any questions that you might pose. So again, if you do have a question, kindly put them into the chat, and we will then, of course, address them at the end of the session if we do have time. If not, we will, of course, follow up with a subsequent communication with respect to all of the questions that have been raised and provide you with those answers. By way of some housekeeping rules, again, if you would kindly put yourself on mute, and Joanne, if you could also confirm that everyone is on mute, please. That's for the purposes of the quality of the recording. In addition, as a reminder, this particular session is accredited. It is recognized through the Law Society of Ontario for CPD credits, but I have to also emphasize that this is not a full training session of case lines. And in fact, I will guide you and point you to areas where you can actually leverage a full training session. This is more for giving you the idea, or rather showing you the features that would really be conducive to a litigator. One final part by way of, certainly by way of housekeeping rules, is as we are all faced with working from home for the most part, I too am working from home, and so I'm at the mercy of my home internet, which sometimes crashes. So I would just ask for your patience. Certainly I will sign back on, just keep yourselves signed on, and I will get back on to the session as soon as I can. So by way of our agenda, I'm just going to do a little bit of a walkthrough with respect to case lines, what it is, if you will, its functionality, how it looks in the back end, what really happens in this behind the scenes, if you will, with respect to the court's instance of case lines. And then we will delve into the platform itself and do a couple of walkthroughs with respect to showing you some of the features. So what exactly is case lines? And again, some of you may already had the opportunity to experience case lines by way of an invite to a matter that was put before the court. But for those of you that are not familiar with case lines, it is a cloud-based digital document evidence sharing platform that really allows for all parties to upload their evidentiary material and of course present that to the court, tribunal, or commission, wherever it may be that you're actually presenting that information. Just so you are aware, of course, the data is stored in Canada, so there's no concerns with respect to where that data residency is. It does definitely reside within Canada. Case lines, of course, accepts a multitude of different types of files. And you know, when we're talking about paperless and virtual hearings and e-trials, e-discovery, etc., naturally we're dealing with all of those documents in electronic format. So of course, case lines meets all of the criteria by way of accepting those well over 400 file types, example, Word documents, Excel, certainly PDFs as we're used to using most of the time, photographs, and in particular media files. By way of its history, case lines has been around for a number of years. It started in the UK, and you can see by the numbers on the right-hand side that it is quite large and extensive across the globe. And in fact, it's reached out to Dubai, South Africa, and a multitude of other countries, including just recently, Australia, and more importantly, North America. With respect to the history in terms of the rollout in Ontario, as you know, we were faced with the dilemma last year when everything was locked down to access to justice rather. And how are we going to do that? And how are we going to address the backlog of hearings if the courts are closed? So the court, of course, implemented a pilot project using case lines just to sort of get a feel for how it would actually meet those challenges that we were faced with. And due to its success, of course, that pilot project now has been rolled out. And it's had been implemented into the various courts, including all of the various regions, and we'll soon get into the OCJ later on in the summer. In fact, you can see by the numbers here, the stats, which are ever growing, that it certainly is a platform that is successful within the court system. And of course, is going to remain here to stay, even when we actually physically return to the courtroom. In fact, it's also been written into the Ontario Rules of Civil Procedure as Rule 4.05, indicating that, of course, this is the application that's going to be used within the scope of the courts. So what actually transpires when we talk about this case lines in the court system? It really starts with an invite to the solicitor of record or to the parties on record. And so the Ontario court will deliver this type of message that you see on my screen. It's very similar to this one in that it will be arriving from the sender no reply at caselines.com. So it is my recommendation that you actually save this into your contact list, because sometimes it does drop into your spam or junk folder. And then of course we get these frantic calls from solicitors suggesting that they did not receive their invite. More importantly, in order for you to actually access your case, you need to register within the system. And what I mean by that is you need to register within the Ontario Courts Case Lines platform. You need only register once. Once you've verified your email address, then of course you will then, going forward, just continue to log on as you're invited to more and more cases. So your email actually may contain this little notice that says you have not yet registered on the system, to which they would advise you to go ahead and do so. And then once that's done, you can of course access your case through this link here or in a variety of different formats. In fact, this is exactly what the platform does look like. And again, ontariocourts.caselines.com. Recommendation is to bookmark it so that you have ease of access to get to that particular platform, because there are several instances of caselines.com and we wouldn't want you to confuse it with any other one. As an indicator, this is where that register button is. Again, as a reminder, only register once, and then going forward, all you need to do is simply go ahead and continue to log on. But before that invite is sort of circulated, I wanted to give you an idea as to what happens behind the scenes. So the court or trial coordinator, of course, sets up the parameters for the virtual communication, and that's that Zoom invite that you would get, or Microsoft Teams, whatever form that they're going to use for that conference link. They proceed to set up the case and case lines and then create the evidentiary folders by way of the parties and other types of folders. And then of course, invite the parties to add their evidence. That's that email that I just showed you in my prior slide. At that point, all parties will submit their evidence by way of uploading the evidentiary material into the case lines platform. Next, after that, all parties will review the evidentiary material within the case lines platform, ultimately join the virtual hearing at the assigned date, and then of course present their evidence. At the end of that specific event or specific hearing, certainly the admitted evidence can be downloaded vis-a-vis if they're like exhibits. So an exhibit list could be downloaded by the trial coordinator. You certainly also have that flexibility to download the evidentiary material. And then, of course, if there's any subsequent hearings to be scheduled, they will be done so. And so your case will continue to be managed, if you will, within the case lines version of your case. Through your lens, through the litigator's lens or litigant's workflow, you wait for that court invite. Again, as a reminder, you can register onto the platform well ahead of that court invite, or you register once you do get the invite. You proceed to log on. Then you're tasked with inviting others on your team. That means within your firm, anybody who's working on the same case with you, you of course send out the invite to them. And I'll show that very briefly. Then the task of uploading the documents to the appropriate evidentiary folder is required of you. You prepare for your hearing ahead of time using the review platform, and then ultimately share that evidentiary material. Just by way of a guideline, if you will, we file our materials on the Ontario online portal we file our pleadings, we file our records, etc. That does not equate to you uploading documents to CaseLines. They are two separate platforms. So it's important that when you do get that email invite to upload your documents immediately, because it is task oriented and it does require some time. So if that task is, left for the law clerk or the legal assistant, it's important to let them know as soon as you get that invite so that they can start that process. The creation of a CaseLines case is triggered by the filing of that material, example, that motion record, application record, etc., or by way of case or pretrial conference, or by way of a phone call request. In terms of the structure of a case, the structure of a case starts with what's referred to as a master bundle. It really is another term for a folder, a repository where all of the documents are housed. All parties' documents are uploaded into the case and are housed in this master bundle. For further organization, the master bundle is broken down into sections. Think of those as subfolders as an example. And so they're organized intelligently. Example, plaintiff's documents, defendant's documents, orders and endorsements, trial, exhibits, etc. Through the experience of the Ontario courts, typically the courts do not allow access to the master bundle to its parties, to the registered users, being yourself. In some occasions, you will see the master bundle. That would be an exception to the rule, perhaps an error, perhaps it was it was a case set up in the earlier days, but for the most part, you will not have access to that master bundle. What typically happens is the court will set up an event sub-bundle. And so what it is a secondary main folder, if you will, which really is just an offset of the documents that are contained in the master bundle. What they provide for you is the sections where you're going to upload your documents that are deemed relevant to that particular event. So example, if I'm dealing with a motion, certainly you're going to have the plaintiff's documents and defendant documents and perhaps orders and endorsements. As the case continues to develop throughout its life cycle, for future sub-event bundles will be created as more and more of those particular types of hearings take place, ultimately to trial if that were to take place. Within the structure of the case overall, it's divided into two parts. It's divided into the update case area. That's where you're going to upload your documentary evidence as well as invite parties, look at the index, etc. And the other part is the review evidence area, where you're going to actually see the documents in its final form before presentation. Just to give you an example of what that structure looks like, this is an example of, the Ontario Courts sub-bundle creation. Again, you will typically see application, motion, whatever it might be. And then, of course, the appropriate sections to which you're going to be asked to upload the documents pertaining to whichever section that is relevant to you. And so you'll see here that little prompt here by way of uploading documents. I'm going to pause here for a moment and take you really outside of the scope of the courtroom for a moment, because CaseLines is not just about attending hearings and sharing evidence at a hearing. In fact, it goes beyond that. And so when we think of a litigation file, or we think of that workflow, we know there are other touch points, if you will, where we are actually, collaborating internally or sharing evidence or sharing documentation vis-a-vis through the exchange of productions, etc. So consider, for example, through the lens of a law firm, implementing CaseLines into your practice allows for that ability to attend discoveries with just your laptop. What this does, of course, is it gives you ease of reference in terms of, directing your witness to the exact document and to the precise area in that document to pose that question. It also gives you that opportunity to collaborate internally by way of creating the notes on those documents that you can then, of course, exchange dialogue across. And finally, certainly, by way of that attendance of discovery, again, just to reiterate, you need only show up with a laptop or a computer rather than the boxes of documents on your trolley or, multiple monitors and computers to attend that discovery. Outside of the scope of caseline of the court, rather, there might be instances where you're attending arbitrations, mediations, settlement conferences, etc. Again, what better way to share that evidentiary material through those particular channels than, of course, using caselines. And certainly by way of preparatory work, you prepare for your motion well ahead of time. Typically, the court will allow you access 2 weeks before the hearing. They invite you 2 weeks before. I'm also hearing in the field, if you will, that sometimes that's not the case, and it happens to be a very short window of time. So, implementing caselines within the law firms gives you that ability to, plan out your thoughts, strategize, analyze your documents so that you're ready to go. When that invite comes from caselines from the court, then you simply, of course, upload them into caselines into the Ontario Courts platform. And most important, of course, is the whole task of trial prep. We take this on weeks, if not months ahead of a particular trial. And in fact, when the court does invite you in, you're not given a huge timeline as indicated. So of course, this gives you the ability to do so well ahead of the game. So as mentioned in my prior screenshot, the Ontario court really restricts permissions and restricts you the ability to customize, if you will. So you can't create your own sections or bundles, etc. And in fact, you're locked out of the master bundle. As an example within a law firm, what then you can do here by way of that example is what you see here displayed is, by way of you organizing your workflow similar to how we would manage a litigation file in this example, or a family matter file, or a criminal matter file. So you have that flexibility if you're using it as your own platform. Just going back to the court for a moment, as a reminder, it's important to keep your eye on the ball with respect to the SCJ's notices to the profession, because there are constant updates as caselines gets further enhancements, direction is changed, if you will, so keep your eye on that. I point you also to their FAQ about caselines. There's extensive information there in terms of how to, and I've sort of called out some of the ones that are of importance. This, of course, is not an exhaustive list, but things that are of top of mind, if you will. And it starts with the naming convention by way of recommendation to, of course, name your files accordingly, as you see here, the file type, the party it's for whom you're representing or filing on behalf of, and the date of the document in that format. When this document is uploaded to Caselines, it will, of course, create a wonderful index for you, take out that date and sort it accordingly and put that into a date field. The documents, by way of the court's guidelines, is they should be uploaded at least 5 days prior to the hearing date, or they may not be considered or may be actually missed. In terms of the handling of exhibits, and certainly any type of document, their recommendation is to upload the documents individually so that they can be marked as exhibits individually, of course, that pertaining to trials. And then there's the whole rule of thumb with respect to hyperlinking, and I won't get into it too much, other than to say that any external hyperlinks, meaning you're hyperlinking to an external website, will be maintained in Caselines, as will hyperlinks within a document if it's pointing to another page in the document. So example, in your motion record, if you're taking your affidavit and pointing to an exhibit through a hyperlink, those will be maintained. If, however, you're hyperlinking to separate documents, that will not be maintained, and that functionality of creating that hyperlink does exist in Caselines. But again, we will not be covering it today, as this is not an extensive training session. More importantly, when you are uploading PDFs, it's important to really plan ahead, if you will, in terms of your organization by way of the bookmarks that are created. So first level bookmarks, the main heading bookmarks, will be recognized in Caselines and will alert Caselines to break down the documents in accordance with those bookmarks. Again, this is in terms of the guidance by the Ontario courts that they want the documents to be separated. If the bookmarks happen to be a different level, like example, an affidavit might be a main bookmark, and then you've indented or created a sub-level bookmark for the exhibits, the sub-level bookmark for those exhibits will not be recognized. But that's okay, because there's an exception to that. So moving forward, another recommendation, again, is to draw your attention to the tips for the bar. There are 16 in total that the court has listed for you, and of course, further guidance. I've just highlighted some of the ones, again, that are of importance to us in terms of managing and preparing our cases. Again, as a reminder, to upload your documents individually, with the exception of affidavits, in which case exhibits will remain with the affidavit as one main document, and as well as your book of authorities along with the cases that are referred therein. Again, that relationship with hyperlinks is just another reminder to you. When documents are uploaded into CaseLines, regardless of whatever page format or base stamping that you've applied on your documents, is not the page reference that you're going to be referring to when you attend before the court. In fact, CaseLines creates its own pagination. And so the recommendation here is to download an index of the documents so that you have that cross-reference of the CaseLines pagination that was created against the documents that you actually uploaded. And of course, by way of the actual attendance before the court, referring the judicial official and other parties to documents, there's a variety of different ways to do so, and we will certainly as we actually delve into the platform. In terms of training and getting that extensive training that is available to you, the OBA, of course, is delivering a series of training sessions. So you just go ahead and register for a particular session. It's not just for the lawyers, but of course for the litigation support staff as well. You can also access CaseLines support documentation by way of guidelines, tips and tricks, and on-demand videos through the Ontario Courts platform, and I'll show you where that is momentarily. And certainly you can also reach out to myself or my colleague to ask for training by Thomson Reuters, and of course for any sales inquiries. So I'm going to switch gears now and actually go into the platform itself. And I've already taken the opportunity to log in. So as you can see here, I'll see my credentials here. This is based on what I've registered myself as. And of course, any type of credentials that you have added will reside in the account details. So that gives you the ability to change that if you want to, change your password, et cetera. You would just cover it here. In terms of notifications, when I log into CaseLines, I will have this alert, if you will, this alert feature. And so each and every case that I'm invited to in the Ontario Courts platform, I will be able to see recent activity. So as you can see here on my screen, I happen to be invited to 2 cases, and I can see that there are recent documents that have been added. That gives you the ability to actually hone in on those new documents rather than you trying to remember the last document you viewed. You can, of course, grab the view here, view those documents, and then remove that notification as a check mark that indeed you have actually seen the document and analyzed it. In terms of accessing your case, of course, that link in that email invite will take you to the case, or you can simply put in the case name here if you happen to know it. You can also access cases through the hearings list. If there happens to be an upcoming hearing, you will see it displayed here. This is really for ease of access to actually get you started by way of accessing the video conference link here. And then, of course, delving right into the review platform in order for you to then share your evidentiary material. Typically, for the most part, people will access the view case list because that gives you that long list of cases that you might have access to. In my example, I only have access to 2. You have the opportunity, of course, to filter by way of a variety of different ways. As a reminder, if you are going to use textual search, be sure to check off all words and apply filter, or you will not be able to see your list shorten. For my purposes, of course, I only have 2, so I'm fine and I don't need to filter. You will not, of course, have the ability to create a case. Again, we are on the Ontario Courts platform, so they're the ones that are managing all of that process for you. But you will have access to the case in these 2 formats, as I indicated in my prior presentation, by way of the update case or review evidence. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on the update case, again, without delving too much into the actual tasks that you're responsible for, but really just to give you an overview. So what you see before my screen, of course, may actually differ, and it definitely does differ than what you will experience when you register on the Ontario Courts or log in into the Ontario Courts platform. This is more conducive to a proprietary version vis-a-vis a law firm actually using it. Really, the scope of your concentration would be on the bundles, the index, sections, people, and my shared group. So just to give you that structure again as a reminder, bundles are really cross sections of that master bundle. The master bundle is that main folder, the repository where all the documents reside. And again, you may not see that in the Ontario's version because they actually restrict that access. Typically, you're going to see sort of those sub bundles, the event sub bundles. And for the purposes of our demo today, I'm just going to go ahead and use this as an example. So you would see motion and the date or application and the date, etc. So right within the scope of this portfolio or this view, if you will, you'll see that there's a download opportunity. You can just go ahead and select download, and now you have the opportunity to download that index as recommended. So you have that nice cross-reference of the pagination that was generated in CaseLines against the documents you uploaded. And certainly the flexibility to download the entire bundle. So example, that motion bundle, if you really wanted to, you could download it. Again, you know, the purpose and goal here is really to manage everything paperless, but nevertheless, it's there and it's available. When you do download this bundle, it will stamp it with the CaseLines page reference and will also quite nicely bookmark the documents for you for ease of access. And again, flexibility just to do page ranges by way of download. So your task with uploading documents. Well, where do I do that? You actually go to the sections because you're actually uploading to an appropriate section rather than to the entire bundle. As I explained, the documents are organized in accordance with those sections. So here's the example of such. And of course, you would then just upload, selecting the upload document section and upload to the proper area. When you upload documents, you simply select that. Now there are two options, and I'm not going to go through the task at hand, but actually describe to you two different scenarios. One is to add what I refer to as loose files, random files that you want to upload into your case, in which case you just grab a variety of different file types, if you will, bring them into the scope, and of course you can drag and drop or just select them as I did. By way of organization, you can, of course, organize them simply by moving them around if you want to really manage the order in which they are uploaded. As you see here, this will be the order that they're uploaded. But of course, the flexibility to do so after upload remains here by way of the update all documents. We will not be covering that today. These are just random documents that I'm uploading. I'm not uploading a record by way of example, motion record, application record, compendium, joint book of documents, etc. So it's important to really plan out what you're doing because for those examples that I just referred to, those records, as the court has asked, if you will, in terms of their guidelines, is to upload the documents individually. The task of you having to break down a record becomes very onerous if you're taking that PDF and trying to do it yourself because you'd have to resave it over and over by way of its counterparts, if you will. Instead, using this feature here, as it indicates, upload filing book, when I then bring in that record, it will then recognize that it has to look at those first level bookmarks as referred to and break down the documents into its separate parts. Again, you would do this separate and apart, if you will, from the documents that you're uploading on their own. This is all covered, of course, in a training session that you can, of course, organize and book for yourself. You're also tasked not only with uploading documents, but also inviting people to the case. So that remains under this tab called People. And what you will see before me, of course, is a variety of a list rather of people that have been invited and have actually gone in and signed and accepted the invitation. The most important part with the whole experience of CaseLines in terms of you accessing your documents is you have to be invited to the case in this example. And then you also have to have access to the pertinent sub-bundles that are created. So when you're inviting people, it's important to actually provide that access to them. And as the last level of permission, you also want to assign tasks to them. What are they allowed to do within the system of case lines? So what you see before me, of course, is those people that have been invited and the bundles to which I've allowed them access to as the case creator. And so you simply select or deselect as you see fit. But all of this actually takes place when you initially invite a party. But of course, you have the flexibility of changing it afterwards. Simply select invite new participant, put in a legitimate email address. If this person has already registered within the system, you will see their actual role or title, if you will. If it happens to be a new person, then you will see a list of roles, and then you just go ahead and select accordingly. As I indicated,
Betty, it's Mike. Sorry to interrupt. We had a request from a couple of viewers if you could increase the size of the print on the screen.
Okay, I will do my best.
To make the text more viewable.
There we go. I might lose some of the viewing experience by a way of increasing the font, but hopefully this will work for us, okay? I might have to decrease it when I go into the review screen. Alrighty, so, you know, as I explained to you, one of your tasks is to invite other people from your firm or from your team rather, so that you have that ability to provide them access to the case, in particular for your support staff that are going to be tasked with uploading the documents. You can invite your client if they happen to be a party to the case, in which case you would then, of course, select them as a litigant by way of example. This only pertains to family and civil matters. It does not pertain to criminal matters. Any other type of invite vis-a-vis, if you wanted to invite an expert in, I suggest that you reach out to the trial coordinator assigned to your case and ask that request or for special permission. So it starts with putting in a legitimate email address, who they are. You can actually establish an expiry date. So what this indicates is, of course, that after a certain moment in time, this party will no longer have access to the case. This gives you the flexibility to really lock it down, if you will. Let's say, for example, you're inviting your client in for that particular motion. You don't want them to have access any longer after the motion. So put in the next day after the motion and they will no longer have access. There's, of course, all these little indicators as you're going through all of the tasks here to give you further guidance. Again, emphasis is that you have to invite them to that particular sub-bundle. So here we're working on a motion, so I'm going to invite that client by way of example to my motion. The last level of permissions, of course, is what will they be allowed to do? And so typically for a litigator, you would have access to a variety of different things such as this. I believe this is sort of the standard with respect to what the court permits. Obviously for your client, all you would permit by way of example is just to the ability to view the documents. You need not have this selected, but what this does is it gives you the opportunity to actually receive those notifications by way of email. Similar to the notifications you see here, the notifications will actually be delivered in your email. So it's up to you whether or not you select or deselect that. Most important part, go ahead and send the advisory invitation, meaning the system will send the invitation out for you instead of you having to notify that person. You can customize the invitation if you'd like to. Otherwise, you can just keep it in generic form, select the invite button rather, and then that person will be invited to the matter. The invitation will sit here as an open invitation until they actually accept the invitation, and then at which point they will be, of course, provided here on the list. And then that flexibility to change access also applies here with respect to those sub-bundles. Now there's one more part here in terms of the invite, and that's the shared group. The shared group really pertains to creating what I refer to as a distribution list. It's a way to really compile an internal group by way of your teammates in order to have that dialogue, in particular when you're doing annotations on your documents. So you select my shared group and then you just add the parties that you want to apply to that particular group. Only one share group exists per user. And again, I'll demonstrate that as we move forward into when we're actually creating notes. So that's pretty much sort of the general ideas to some of the tasks that you will be responsible for and where you access them in the back end, or what I refer to as the back end, which is really the update case section. We're now actually going to proceed into the whole process of really analyzing those documents, preparing for evidence, and ultimately presenting those documents. So to access that, that's that secondary part that I talked about called review evidence. Within the scope of the update case area, you have that tab here, which of course you can select. That will take you to the review platform. And notice as well on the top of my screen that you see a variety of tabs that are open. Again, that just indicates to me that I've actually activated various viewing options. And in fact, you'll see that I have the review tab open once. That gives me that flexibility to toggle back and forth if I so choose. You can also access the review evidence through the review case list. Simply select review evidence here and you will get into the same viewing space. So let's dissect this in terms of the features and what you see on my screen. The review evidence is really divided into 3 parts, not 3 windows. These are not separate windows that can be undocked from the viewing space. It's really just 3 separate divisions, broken down by way of the index of documents that we uploaded, broken down by way of the notations that we created, and then of course by way of the actual viewing area. So the focus of our example today, of course, is to work on those motion materials that were recently updated. So as minuscule as it is, and I cannot enlarge this any further, you'll see that I'm actually working on that sub-bundle. If you happen to have access to future sub-bundles, then you can, of course, toggle between them. And how you do that, of course, is selecting the change link. This will give you a list of all those sub-bundles that you would have access to, and then you just go ahead and select whichever ones that you want to actually view. By way of the document list, using the chevrons, of course, will expand or collapse. And so, as a reminder, these were those sections that were actually accessible through this sub-bundle here and where we were actually uploading our documents. And so to view those documents, I simply toggle back and forth one at a time. That will, of course, bring the document up into my viewing space. And of course, you'll see the title here, just giving it a second to catch up. There's also an opportunity actually to look at documents side by side. So if I wanted to compare 2 separate documents, and where this really drives home is really in terms of giving you an example by way of hyperlinks. So you'll notice on this affidavit, I have examples of hyperlinks. This type of visual cue, this is indicates to me that this particular hyperlink was created in CaseLines. I'll show you what they look like momentarily in terms of any hyperlinks that were created outside of CaseLines. So I'm going to actually access a split view screen, and that's accessible through the split window that you see here. It looks like 2 pieces of paper. I'm going to go ahead and select that. And depending on how I implement sort of the toggle back and forth here, it's going to tell me or direct me as to where I need to go by way of moving my documents, whether it be in the right screen or the left screen. So as an example, on my affidavit, there's that hyperlink. I can click on that hyperlink, and now I'm looking at not only the affidavit, as this example implies, but also the associated exhibit that was hyperlinked here. So it gives me a real nice comparative view rather than just looking at one document at a time. In terms of other types of hyperlinks, as I indicated, you can create hyperlinks outside of CaseLines. They will be maintained if they are pointing to external URLs or if they are pointing within a page of the same document. You'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen that the list is broken down, and it may not appear obvious at the moment, but it's actually that motion record that I was referring to. Because I selected Upload Filing Book, the motion record was split by those first level bookmarks that in accordance with the Ontario Courts guidelines. So here's that index that was included in my motion record. This is the visual cue to say that the hyperlinks were created outside of the scope of case lines. So once again, I have that ability to actually click on those hyperlinks and access the document accordingly and look at them in a split view if I want to. As well, if they happen to be external hyperlinks, by way of example, my factum is also separated. The Schedule A, here's the reference to a particular case, which will then take me into the CanLII website to actually access that particular case. And we'll just let it load for a moment. So in terms of really analyzing your documents, and you can, analyze them one at a time here simply by, going through one document at a time, or using your split view and comparing two documents or looking at them side by side. In fact, the split view document is also effective when you're actually attending at a hearing. Suppose counsel is presenting a document, but you want to find another document. Counsel will direct you, and I'll show you those momentarily. And so you can see that direction or that document that's being presented. And then, of course, look at your own internal workflow, if you will, with respect to analyzing a different document using that split view. You'll also notice that the page ranges are here. So, of course, I can see B1, B3, B4, etc. And of course, it's all based, the pagination is based on the section, hence the reason why you see a different letter here and the page ranges for those documents. In addition to that, what you will see stamped on the document, of course, are those case lines pagination references here. So here it will show you as I move from document to document that it's C1, C2 by way of example, etc. Now, depending on how the case has been set up by the court, you might actually see 2 page references. As a reminder, the documents reside in the master bundle. Using a sub-bundle really is just a cross-section or a means of filtering the documents into that sub-bundle, and so the pagination is recreated. Sometimes the pagination is the same, and sometimes they're different depending on how the documents have been uploaded or organized in that case. If you happen to see both page references, it's a good idea to actually address the court and say, which page reference would you like me to refer to? And then, of course, you can be directed accordingly. In terms of actually looking at the documents and the content within the documents, of course, we have the ability to search documents. So I'm going to actually spend a brief moment of time, if you will, on addressing some of the features through the tab or the ribbon you see on my screen. The home takes us back to that case list, takes us back to that update case area. It's actually called update bundle here. It provides a list of hearings if I want to see them, and of course, the case information by way of the court file number, etc. In terms of searching, we're going to rely on the Find tab. Of course, basic functionality here, as you see, by way of next document, previous page, etc. Viewing history gives you the flexibility of actually accessing a list of the documents that your eyes or your clicker landed on at the time you logged on to the case to the time you logged off. So of course you can have that flexibility to toggle back and forth. Once you log out, that will be erased. Really, I'm going to zone in on the search functionality here. I want to search across my case. There are guidance here in terms of some strategic ways of searching, advanced searching, proximity, Boolean, etc. So of course you can leverage all of those. I'm just going to keep mine simplistic for the moment. You just type in your terminology. You can search across a current document, across the whole scope of the collection, by way of titles, by way of notes, and by way of document text. Once you hit your search, your result will appear here with some context around that search result, as you see here, and of course the hyperlink results here. Another option for split view is to do a comparative. Use the search functionality to see the document, or the search result rather, and then to see the document actually populate in the second screen. I draw your attention to the query that I did do for Waterside, as the example indicates. Notice that Waterside is handwriting. It's a very unique feature to CaseLine's search functionality in that you can actually search handwriting provided it's legible, so you can, of course, expand your search results by that very unique and powerful feature. In addition to that, if you happen to have photos that have terminology in that photo, provided that photo is, of course, clear, those results will appear as well. So I'm just going to scroll into that to find it for you. And so here's that example of that very situation. Now, there is no way to actually save your search results. So once you're finished searching and analyzing those documents, you just go ahead and clear out the search. So we've done our search, we've identified documents, we've looked at documents, we played around with them. We're familiar, certainly by way of the pagination that's been created in CaseLines. So let's spend a couple of minutes in terms of the annotation feature, being mindful of our timeline. As a pause here, I might actually run 5 minutes over. If you do have to jump off, no worries. We will be sharing the recording with everybody sort of the next day, if you will. So if you've missed out and you have to jump off, no worries at all. In terms of the note functionality, there's a couple of things to be mindful of. First of all, to create a note, you have to actually assign a color to a note. That's sort of a tracking mechanism for us. There's no rule per se in terms of the color selection. You can do it by way of author or the type of note. It's completely up to you by way of what you select in your color palette. When you select your color palette, it activates the ribbon in that selected color. And then, of course, there are two types of notes. A case note for the whole case, if you will. Oftentimes, judicial officials leverage that in terms of making their own observation notes, if you will, or commentary about the whole case. And certainly on a page level. So really delving into the corpus of a document to identify that. The pen note is really like acting as a stylus for tablets, touchscreens, etc. It's a means for you sort of to, draw attention to certain textual information. Understand, however, that when you're using the note feature, if you're using case notes and page notes, they are tracked. And why you're tracking them is, of course, to have that search functionality, the organization, collaborative, and the ability to actually download your notes into a report format. If you're using a pen note feature, such as I've just described, then you will not have access to them via those particular types of results. So you won't be able to download them in a report or even search for them on that matter. It's really just a visual cue for you. So when you select create a note, what happens is it brings up your own personal notepad with a couple of formatting options. More importantly, I draw your attention to these three aspects. Private note is the default, meaning it will be for your eyes only. I guarantee it is your eyes only. No one else will see it. It is actually applied to the user logon. So even if somebody is managing the case, they will not see that private note. Again, emphasis added here for security measures for those internal notes you're creating and for any judicial officials that are creating notes, they are private. A shared group note goes back to that process that I talked about of creating that distribution list, if you will, for that internal dialogue across your teammates. And then, of course, the widely shared note is for access for everybody's eyes. You can, of course, add your text, go ahead and save it. And what it does is it drops it down into your notes panel, as you see here on my screen. A page note gives you the flexibility now to draw attention to a particular page on the document. So you can do it in a variety of different ways. Simply, zoning in on a particular portion of text that way opens up the notebook. More importantly, really is the highlight text feature, because when I use the highlight text feature, it will then actually copy and paste that text as reference, a citing reference, if you will, into your actual note. And then you can add your own comments to that particular one. This is particularly helpful if you want to perhaps prepare a series of questions, if you will, for a witness, because now you can draw attention to a particular reference and then, of course, direct your questioning to that particular witness based on what you've just copied and pasted. In terms of the whole process of annotations and properties, if you will, I'm going to draw your attention to the right side of the screen. And so you'll see here a couple of options. And so notice that I have some titles on those, and those are really related to what's referred to as our tag feature. So when I create a note, I can actually apply these little post-its, if you will, electronic post-its or tags to whatever it might be. You have the flexibility to design that yourself. Here's some examples, that internal dialogue, if you will, by way of issues, by way of preparing for a witness and drawing attention to whatever it is that you want to create by way of those questions. You can then, of course, filter down into that. So example, if I'm preparing for a witness, I'm going to go ahead and say I only want to see the notes that I created for witnesses. When you create a page note, a hyperlink is actually added to the document. So what that does is it gives you the flexibility to actually draw your eyes right to that document where that particular note is. Here's that example, and that visual cue is also applied here with this bubble, so you can see it here as well. So now I can do a comparative, if you will, in terms of two different documents. So say, for example, I'm questioning my witness, if you will, and I'm going through the process of looking at a document, and it's, in direct conflict, if you will, in terms of the testimony versus another document. Now what I can do then, of course, is apply that double screen as an example, and then go ahead and grab those two documents. I'm just trying to catch everything up at the same time to do that comparative results side by side. Once again, I'm leveraging the opportunity of using the notes function here and accessing those hyperlinks. You can, of course, edit and remove the notes and reply accordingly. So applying accordingly, as to demonstrate that, here's an example, instructions to paralegal, confirm that the cost outline includes everything. Paralegal then replies, yes, it is included, etc. So that's that engaging in that private conversation right within the scope of not only case lines, but the document itself. At the end of the day, you can download your notes. Simply go to the download button, select download notes, and then what will be provided for you is a really nice report. And hopefully you'll see this on my screen. And so any documents that you have access, any notes rather that you have access to, you will see displayed here by way of the document itself. You will also see a portion of that text where that note was applied to on a particular page with its reference, as well as the note and the note's properties. So that gives you that opportunity to actually have a separate report outside of the scope of case lines. You can also download a document here and download a bundle as well. In terms of redactions, I just want to touch upon that briefly. Of course, the whole premise behind the redaction feature is that you typically redact your documents outside of the scope of case lines, and you upload them into case lines already in its redacted form. However, there is the feature to do so. Again, it is not permissioned in the court's instance of case lines, but I just want to kind of briefly touch upon it for you momentarily, that you can indeed apply redactions here. Not only can you apply redactions, you can actually do it in bulk. And so that really saves us times in terms of that flexibility to do that. So if I were to search for a particular term, and I'm just going to grab a document by way of example here. And so style cup, and I'm going to search for the term style cup, search for that document. You'll see these two visual indicators, again, providing you with a context around the search result. Anything in blue, it's been previously redacted. Anything in yellow means you still have to redact. And of course, now you have that flexibility to redact the whole document or all documents based on that redaction request or that redaction search. You also have the flexibility to create those categories. What this does, of course, is in preparation for these documents, through your lens, you will see that word still, it's there, it's just sort of shadowed, if you will. But with respect to the document actually being presented, the actual word will actually be redacted in true form, as you will see here momentarily. Again, just an aside in terms of an additional feature, if you have a proprietary version or instance of case lines. So the last few minutes I'd like to actually spend time on actually presenting your documentation. We've uploaded, we've reviewed, we've annotated, and now we're ready to present our evidence. And so we sign on to our Zoom, and it's important to understand that each and every person that has been invited into a matter will also have the ability to log on to the case. So when they log on to a case, all their viewing experiences will be different, if you will. It's dependent on the user. So while I might be looking at one document, another signed in user will be looking at a different document. So we want to be able to draw eyes or attention to the same document. What I'm doing right now is I'm sharing my screen, and this is not the typical way that you are going to share your evidence. In fact, what you're doing, if you're doing it in this experience, which is typical when we're attending Zoom or meeting or Teams calls, is you're sharing everything, including your annotations. So recommendation is not to use a shared screen experience. If you are adamant that you want to, just be sure to apply the X here. This will hide your notes. And more importantly, in the notes panel, to actually hide your notes in this format. So now if you're adamant about sharing in this the way I'm doing right now, then I can go ahead and share the documents without anybody seeing my notes through the panel or actually visually on the screen. Again, not recommended. How you are going to present in court, again, based on those tips that I sort of called out at the onset of our meeting today, is you are going to use a couple of features. Again, completely up to you which feature you want to do. One is by way of the find page that you see here. This refers to the case lines pagination. So typically what you would do at a hearing, in accordance to whatever is suggested, if it's the master or the current, then you're going to select that. And then I'm going to say, Your Honor, and parties, I'd like you to go to B21, in which case each and every user that's signed in will type that and then of course hit find page and land on that page. This is the affidavit of James K. Yay or nay, everybody agrees, and then you can go ahead and direct your questioning. So here everybody's managing that direction. They're all doing the inputting of that page find, if you will. The more popular feature is the direct others to page. You want to be sure to apply a page direction, as you see here, and then select direct others to page. In this example, I am directing others to this particular page. I will get this prompt to which I say, okay. Each and every user that is logged on will get a prompt at the receiving end saying, this person wants to direct you to page B21, in which case they will say yes. So that now gives you the control to direct them rather than having to try to scramble and find the page themselves. The auto direct feature will just turn off that prompt. So you're literally driving their viewing experience by you directing them without having to prompt them. And the final way to present, of course, is the present mode. This is a little different than my sharing my screen here. In a present mode, again, people are signed on. Start presentation. They will follow you here in their own experience, and all that will be viewed is just what you see on my screen here, is this indicator here. I will see a list of everybody following me. No one will see my notes or the document list. Again, I'm just sharing my view application here. As from the receiving end, as the person following, you also have that flexibility now to follow that person and of course do your own comparison on documents on the other view if you want to. So I'm getting this little reminder here as you see here on my screen. This is a prompt. Again, it's a visual cue up here to let me know whether or not my internet is stable or not. Green meaning as all systems go. Yellow means it's a little shaky, and a red will mean that there's no access to the internet. So I'm going to pause now and really rely on my producers now to open the floor for Q&A if there happens to be any.
Hi, Betty, it's Mike here. We have about 10 questions, and I can give you some of these in the order they came in, if you like. And it looks like quite a few people are still on the line, so okay. We'll just go through these. So can we expect that CaseLines will add the ability to import bookmarks in PDF documents? And if so, when?
They are accepting PDF bookmarks. Sorry, the first level bookmarks are currently being accepted. Again, just as a reminder, when you go in to upload documents that do have bookmarks, what you're actually using is you're actually using that upload filing book feature. Emphasis being, as reminded on the session today, is only the first level bookmarks will be recognized, not the second levels or those ones that are indented. Next question.
Okay, next question. Should support staff also register on case lines or just the lawyer?
Yes, you would want support staff to be registered on case lines if they happen to be uploading the documents for you. What you're doing is you're leveraging resources internally to do the process for you. And instead of you having to do that process, rely on your support staff to do that. Speaking of support, one thing I forgot to indicate, of course, is that support page here that you see accessible through the Ontario Court. Okay, so you can just scroll down and get a variety of different documents. Go ahead and.
Okay, the next question is, if you change email addresses, will you need to re-register with case lines? What happens if you get conflicted out of a file?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so really, I guess the first question's the more important one. So if you change email addresses, will you need to re-register with case lines?
Yes, you do. Registration is recognized by your email address.
Okay. Okay, next question. As a criminal defense lawyer, I don't want the Crown or the judge to know that I am presenting evidence until the moment I wish to present it. Doesn't this platform prevent me from doing that?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And no, it does not prevent you from doing that. There's actually guidelines in terms of the uploading of sealed orders or documents that are sort of confidential that you only want to present at the last moment. I direct you to the SCJ's website for that recommendation. And there's going to be further guidelines as it's being rolled out to the criminal court. But yes, there is an opportunity to actually hold that back.
Yeah, that was there were a few comments from other viewers as well that was a really good question. Here's another really good one that a group had asked. Could we get a copy of the presentation at the end? Several people had requested that.
Yes, we will be circulating the presentation at the end.
Okay.
It'll actually come in a subsequent communication from FOLA with a link to the recording as well as the actual deck that I presented.
Okay, the courts, here's another question, Betty. The courts are not creating the matter in case lines until a hearing is scheduled. How are we supposed to use it in discoveries?
Right. So as a reminder, I explained that in terms of using it in discoveries is actually an example of a law firm implementing case lines. So you have your own instance of case lines and you're managing your workflow within the scope of your practice. So in that example, that's how you would manage your discoveries. You would upload productions, you can manage your undertakings, you can manage it in a variety of different ways. And then when you actually have a hearing scheduled, at the moment, what you would do is you would download the documents that you're actually going to need for that particular hearing and upload it to the court's instance. We are currently working on a rollout, which I expect to be out in early summer, is this an actual direct syncing. So it's just a sort of a send to button, if you will, for the evidentiary material that you're going to need for your hearing. So emphasis is that it's your own case lines version as a subscription model that you can manage that discovery process.
Yeah, so the second part of that question was, for example, I have 4 related motions for summary judgment to be argued tomorrow. I've not yet received the case lines invitation. It would be extremely helpful to have the case lines invitation created when the proceeding is commenced.
You mean at the time of the initial filing of pleadings, when you say commenced, I would assume. So if you have not received an invitation yet, again, the first place to go is look at your spam or junk folder. Second is to get in touch with the trial coordinator to see if indeed the case has been, created in CaseLines. There might be some instances where you're still using sync.com to present your evidence. So I would strongly recommend you get in touch with the court. At this stage, if it's the day before, I suspect that it's not actually in the CaseLines platform and they're expecting you to present in the usual fashion by way of sharing your documents on screen or through the sync.com platform.
Okay, next question is kind of related to that. So what prompts the court to invite you to participate, and when will we receive an invitation from the court?
So it's triggered by way of an event through the filing of materials. So example, if you're filing a motion record or application record, that triggers that consideration for CaseLines, a CaseLines case to be created. It can also be discussed at a pretrial or case conference by way of a request, and certainly by way of you requesting that your case be put into CaseLines as well, by way of a phone call. And so typically you get access to it, I'm saying it graciously, 2 weeks ahead of time, but I've also had feedback from various lawyers that they're actually sometimes they're only given a few days. So we have to be mindful of that.
Okay, the next question is, can you print documents?
Yes, you can. Well, it's through the download option. So 2 areas to do that. In the bundles here, what you're going to do, of course, is you are going to use the download option here. The download option, you can download your complete bundle or page ranges. That creates a PDF document. And then if you want to hit the print button, go right ahead. But we're, of course, encouraging you to continue to view your documents electronically. But of course, you can always print. The other option is to download from this review area.
Okay, the next question is, if the documents are bookmarked and hyperlinked in Adobe, will this remain in that format when downloaded into CaseLines?
So the rule of thumb is if the document is hyperlinked to another page in the same document, then the hyperlinks will be maintained. This is how you see it on the screen. It's like a purple highlight. This was a hyperlink created in a PDF world pointing to the notice of motion in the motion record. Even though the document has now subsequently been split up because it was originally all one record, these hyperlinks will be maintained. If I'm pointing to an external website, the example I used was a Factum where I had my cases, this will also be maintained. If, however, I am pointing to 2 different documents, example, my Factum, I'm actually pointing to an affidavit, then I have to create the CaseLines version of the hyperlink. So I have to do it in CaseLines, and this is how it looks. In a moment, it'll come up on my screen. Just let it catch up here. And so you will have to do that process within the scope of CaseLines.
Okay, I'll give you 1 or 2 more questions, Betty. Any chance we can have the format for file names changed so that it's year, month, date, title of doc, so we can organize the files in Windows Explorer chronologically?
That's something you have to take up with the court. This is the court's guidelines. I don't make the rules. They made those rules. So Mike, you probably have more insight into that as you are, of course, client manager for MAG. I don't know if you want to add further comment on that.
Yeah, I'll just add that we're passing along feedback from lawyers using CaseLines to the court, and we have regular meetings every 2 weeks or so just to keep this feedback flow continuing. So that's a really good question, and we'll pass that along and provide that request to the court, and along with the other lawyer feedback, and then they will advise if there's any change to that.
Thank you.
Next question, and thanks for everyone for staying on late here, is are we required to invite opposing counsel or just our team?
Just your team. The court will typically invite all parties to the matter, being solicitor of record, the first solicitor that's on record for each party, or if it's a self-represented, they will also invite that litigant. You do not have to invite opposing counsel. The only time that would occur is if you have a subscription of case lines within your firm, you're managing your own process. You could, of course, then invite opposing counsel to share the productions at a discovery by way of example. And then, of course, that creates a whole opportunity for a return on investment by way of charging that opposing counsel. But within court, no, you do not.
Okay, one other question. I've seen the Zoom link for the hearing sometimes appearing on case lines with both conference ID and password, and then in brackets together with the link, and sometimes appearing without both, in brackets just the link. Any comments on that?
My only comment is, again, to direct that to the court. That would just be by way of the court support staff that are actually sending out those invites. It's not managed in case lines. They're creating it outside the scope of case lines and putting it there. So I'd suggest that you reach out to the court if that happens. Certainly you would want to see the ID information for sure.
Where do I find information on pricing for case lines for law firms?
So you can, of course, reach out to me directly. Well, I'm not sure if anybody's on the website or that's asking the question if they're still on. I have my contact information on the deck itself, so feel free to reach out to me and we can, of course, then have a offline dialogue.
Yeah, the next question is if we are doing other training sessions. I can maybe answer that one. We're going to be talking to the Federation of Law Associations about possibly doing some more of these sessions because they have been really in high demand, this one and the one that we did yesterday. There's definitely training sessions provided through the Ontario Bar Association. So those are full training sessions as opposed to these sessions like we did today, which are more of like an introduction to case lines. Betty, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, you can also reach out to Thomson Reuters through our learning consultants team. We have a very strong customer learning consultant team who can also provide training.
Do we have time for a couple more questions?
Yes, one more minute.
Okay. Will a lawyer who is acting as an agent and not on record still get an invite?
That's a good question, one I don't know the answer to. If you're not solicitor, so it would be, so perhaps for clarity, if you're acting as an agent, then the party for whom you're representing would be on record, so they would get the invite, I would assume.
Yeah, and I think
we'll take that one away.
Yeah, it might relate to if a lawyer was representing the Public Prosecution Service of Canada or something, then definitely they can be invited to the.
Absolutely, they can be invited.
Well.
I just don't know if they will get an invite from the court. Someone else would have to invite them in.
Right.
So in your example, it would be, the association that would invite the agent in.
Great. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And of course, we will follow up with a FAQ with all of these questions, and we'll provide those answers in there. You can also expect to receive a link to the recording as well as a copy of the presentation deck. And thank you so much for your time and for actually spending a little bit over time. And I do hope that you found this very useful. Enjoy your day, everyone. Bye now.